Climate change, we have a limited amount of time to resolve it, and it concerns everyone, literally everyone.
How could we stay under 2 degrees C? Everybody has to do everything possible.
Doing things sustainably is even more modern than modern.
But it's a win-win situation. Why isn't it happening?
We have one more shot at this in Paris.
The fact is that if you don't think you can play a role, you won't.
Our window is closing, but our window's still open.
How do you pronounce your name?
Kaya.
Kaya. Kaya in Filipino means can. We can.
Really?
Yeah,
Kaya means we can.
we can.
I like it. I didn't know that.
Now you do. When you really look at it, climate change is about people. How it will affect people and how it affect the most vulnerable people.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's basically how will you help them adapt to the effects? How will you empower them?
We are already facing the impacts of climate change at 0.8 degrees. At 1.5, who knows what they're going to be? But there are some people here who believe 2 degrees is still safe. Believe it or not, there are even some negotiating countries here who believe that 2 degrees is safe and that 1.5 is unachievable.
So here in Bonn, one of the issues that came up is something that has been running for a while. It's called a review of the long-term goal. It's been going on for 2 years. It's called, the technical term is the 2013 to 2015 review of the long-term. We use a lot of jargon here, so which can't be understood by anybody else. But anyway, what it did was it had something called a structured expert dialogue, which has come out with a report. And to put it in very simple language, what it says is, with the 2-degree temperature rise, many people are still safe, but not everybody is safe. And if you want to make everybody safe, or at least as many people as possible safe, then the temperature target needs to be brought down to 1.5 degrees, even though that's very, very difficult, and we recognize that. Otherwise, we're condemning tens of millions of people to die. We're protecting the rich, but we're not protecting the poor.
And so the two options are still in the text right now.
Right now, the global agreement is a 2-degree target, and many people are trying to renege on that. They're changing the goalpost, saying 2 degrees is too difficult, we're not going to be able to make it, we should give it up. Whereas we are saying not only is 2 degrees absolutely essential, we want it to be 1.5 degrees. And we know it's going to be difficult, but if we all pitch in, we think we can do it. The technology exists, the money exists, the political will doesn't exist. We have to create political will.
Where do you see, if you look ahead to Paris, where do you see the sticking points?
In Copenhagen, the developed countries agreed that cumulatively they would contribute upwards of $100 billion a year beginning in 2020. So there is an enormous gap between what is needed for mitigation and adaptation in the developing world and what the developed world is willing to come up with.
Finance is a way to establish a certain amount of differentiation between the countries. The poor countries and major emerging economies or advanced economies and rich countries. So there are these various nuances of identifying different clusters of countries.
Here in Bonn at the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change talks, I am an advisor to the group of countries called the least developed countries, which are 48 of the poorest countries in the world, most of them in sub-Saharan Africa, but also some in Asia, including my country, Bangladesh.
Here in the UNFCCC, we have blocks, negotiating blocks, right? You have 7 China, you have LMDC, like-minded developing countries. Then you have
like-minded developing.
Yeah, and you have LDC, the least developed countries. But the big categorization really is about Annex 1 and non-Annex 1 countries. Rich countries, poor countries.
Right.
That's it.
Okay, so Annex 1 is rich countries and
non-Annex 1
Not
countries
annex.
are basically countries that are economically challenged.
Right.
So you're going to love this acronym.
Oh, no.
CBDR RC. CBDRRC. So it stands for Common but Differentiated Responsibilities and Respective Capabilities.
You had to look down.
I had to look at it because I can't remember it. They have a common goal, but their responsibilities and their capabilities are different according to the Annex 1 and the non-Annex 1.
Who set up this?
So the Annex 1 and the non-Annex 1 comes from the actual Framework Convention on Climate Change that was signed in 1992. The idea of the developed world and the developing world, and that the developed world should help the developing world meet the challenges of climate change, because the developed world has benefited so much from being able to emit so freely for so many years. It's a concept of historical responsibility.
Okay.
So since the 1850s, when the Industrial Revolution started, These are the countries that the reason they're so developed now is because of fossil fuels. That's like really at the crux. And it goes back all the way to the convention.
The convention already has laid out mechanisms for ensuring that the countries will be transparent in reporting on their emission reductions, on the use of climate finance, on how they're implementing adaptation activities. But this is international guidance. Okay? When you want to really know how climate finance is being used, you have to go to the ground. And on the ground, at local level, subnational governments, national governments, not all have the capacity to accurately report on how money is being used. We would want to know where the money that we're going to get from mitigating or from even adaptation, we want to know how our local officials are using it. It's basically just about transparency in its most fundamental meaning.
Finance is actually, in a way, also embedded in these two categories, the mitigation and adaptation, because the way it is referred to, both finance and technology are referred to as means of implementation. So whether you want to act on mitigation side or you want to do adaptation activities, you would need some resources, and that is usually finance and technology. In terms of technology also, there's negotiations happening. What mechanism would work for exchange of technologies from the developed world to the developing world.
The Philippines, for one, for example, we are mandated to have our own national adaptation plans. Okay, we'll give you the money, go draft your own plan, make sure that it will work. How do you make sure that the people you want to help are actually getting the help?
Right.
Okay, so that's what I meant when I said that we need to concentrate also on transparency within that framework.
What are you working on with them? What kind of issues are the contentious
The
issues?
topics that I work on are adaptation, which is how to deal with the impacts of climate change, which are going to affect these countries particularly badly, and increasingly now on a new and emerging topic called loss and damage, which is essentially what's going to happen if we fail to mitigate and we fail to adapt. There's a long history of loss and damage. We've had climatic events and non-climatic events like earthquakes and volcanoes over the centuries, and they've caused a lot of loss and damage. What we are now concerned about is additional loss and damage due to human-induced climate change. And so what we need to do here in the Framework Convention is figure out how we're going to deal with those inevitable and unavoidable impacts that will cause loss and damage in the future, and may well be doing it already now. In fact, recently there's been a scientific study that shows that Hurricane Sandy that hit the United States had a significant human-induced global warming impact in it, and the city of New York actually estimated loss and damage of $80 billion from Sandy.
Wow.
And they sent a bill to Congress, and Congress gave them $50 billion. So loss and damage is well recognized as something that happens all the time. Yeah. Governments like the United States have systems of dealing with it. The federal government pays the states for the loss and damage that occurs due to these events. We're just now internationalizing that. We did have an agreement in Warsaw. It's called the Warsaw International Mechanism on Loss and Damage. It has an executive committee, it has a work program. The initial work program is due to finish in COP22, where we will take another decision on what to do. There is an element of this in the Paris Agreement, which is simply, should the Paris Agreement recognize loss and damage as a separate issue or not? The two options in the text that we have at the moment, which is undergoing very fierce debate, is one group of countries, namely the rich countries, want it deleted, no reference to loss and damage in the Paris Agreement, whereas the developing countries, led by the small island states and least developed countries in Africa group, are wanting it to be retained as a separate issue. That's it, just retained as a separate issue. But we don't know what will happen in the end.
Okay, and how are you feeling about Paris right now?